My book, The Expressive Powers of Law, discusses why people obey the law. And I emphasize two explanations that other people haven't really discussed, and they're expressive explanations for why law influences behavior by what it says rather than what it does. So one idea is that law is informative. It conveys information. So if you move to a community that bans smoking in restaurants and mandates curbside recycling, then you learn something about the attitudes of people in the community about smoking and recycling. And that is likely to have some effect on your behavior. Most people want to avoid disapproval to some degree if they can. They want to avoid being considered a jerk by their neighbors and even by strangers. And so this is information telling them what people in their community expect of them, and it gives them a reason to engage in the expected behavior aside from legal sanctions or some notion that they have a moral obligation to obey the law. The book discusses this information idea in the context of government endorsement of religion, stand your ground laws, drug legalization, anti-discrimination laws, and a variety of other contexts. So the other idea is that law helps people coordinate their behavior. And I should start with an example involving a one-way sign for a driver. Why do you comply with a one-way sign? It's not entirely because of a fear of sanctions from the government or because the law is the law and you think you should have a moral obligation to obey it, but also just because you don't want to have an accident and you know you need to coordinate your behavior with that of the other drivers on the road. And the government expression in a one-way sign offers a way of doing that that is kind of self-reinforcing. And the same is true of stop signs or the lines on the road that demarc lanes or traffic signals. All of these give us a way of ordering or coordinating our behavior, thus avoiding accidents. And I then argue that this is something the law does in a variety of other contexts: international law, property law, and quite a few other examples where people have an interest in coordinating their behavior to avoid some mutually bad outcome. In the traffic example, the mutually bad outcome is the crash. In other examples, the mutually bad outcome, say for two nations, might be war. So my book, The Expressive Powers of Law, has two main goals. One is to persuade people of the expressive power of law, that it can influence behavior by what it says rather than just by threatening sanctions or through the power of legitimacy. The other, though, is to actually identify the limits of the expressive powers of law. But for a different audience, I think they're all too willing to, and maybe too exuberant in their claims about the expressive power of law. A lot of people say that law sends a message, and when they criticize law, they say it sends the wrong message. When they demand legal reform, they say we need to send the right message. Justices of the Supreme Court sometimes talk about the message that law sends. And I try to introduce some discipline to these kind of arguments, to actually say, here's what you need to show in order to make a strong expressive claim, and and here are some examples of some weak expressive claims. The issue of why people comply with the law is very fundamental for anyone who cares about law. We use law to change people's behavior, and we don't get all the compliance that we want. There's widespread noncompliance in certain areas of law. So it seems very important to understand not just some of the reasons people obey the law, but really all of the reasons people obey the law. I hope the book changes the way that law and economics scholars think through the effects of law, and that they give systematic attention to these expressive consequences and don't think solely about deterrence.